everyone, welcome back to another episode of Trending Up. We are super excited and pumped up this day because we have a special guest here with us, none other than Dalilah Negrete, the next and the future face of law in the United States of America. So, thank you so much, Dalilah, for helping, for coming on the podcast. What a privilege to have you, future Supreme Court nominee. Uh,
Don't know about that.
but yeah, we got Edgar as well. So hope you guys are doing well. For those of you that don't know, Dalilah Negrete is someone that I saw grow up. I used to change her diapers and stuff like that. I'm just kidding. No, she is really good friends with my younger sister. I am really good friends with her older brother Mauricio. Shout out to Mauricio. And we heard Shay Negrete a couple of maybe now over a year ago now. So we are grateful for the Negrete family and how they've been able to share with us. And so Dalilah is a recent graduate from Cooney Law in New York and just finished her bar exam a couple of weeks ago. So she's awaiting those results, which she knows she will pass. And on top of that, she has been just traveling around the United States and just the coming back to normal life, I think, as you've been studying so hard,
Yeah.
right? Hopefully, I kind of summarized the last couple of weeks a little
Yeah.
bit there.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
Hi, Sebi. Hello,
Hi.
Edgar. It's
Hey,
so nice to be on the show with y'all.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Like Sebi said, my sister-in-law Shay, my sister, has been on this and heard lots of other episodes, and the work y'all do is just really nice and really refreshing, and just important to share all the stories. So thank you guys.
Well,
Thanks for having me.
thank you. So, I was about to say Shay. So Dalilah, bro. As we jump into this, we just kind of want to talk about your faith journey, and in trending up, we just like to talk about the journeys that everyone's in, and everyone's looks different, how they walk with Jesus, what their sometimes what we call come to Jesus moment is like. And so just tell us a little bit before we jump into that about you, right? We know a little bit of more recently where you are, but tell us about where you were born, where you were raised, and maybe your background with faith, if you don't mind. And we'll go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so my name is Delilah. I use she, her pronouns. I am from Texas, born and raised.
Right.
I grew up a little bit in like the DFW area, but then whenever I was in fourth grade, we moved to the big, bustling, thriving town of Keene, Texas.
Ooh,
This
that's a
big
lie.
city, I'm sure you heard of it, the Big Apple, as they call it.
The Big Orange.
The Big Orange, Keene, Texas. And I grew up there, with my older brother Mauricio, my two parents, in a really loving, really nice home, in a very nice, Christian Adventist community.
Mm-hmm.
I, went to academy there for high school, and then I went to Baylor University in Waco, Texas, shortly after that.
Okay.
And, from a young-ish age, I think since like high school, I've wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't exactly know exactly what kind. I thought like women's rights or like human rights, those things were kind of interesting. But it's just been so incredible to be like at the end of this journey,
yeah,
just taking the
incredible.
bar and like looking back and seeing all the ways that God has like carried me through like high school to college, and then to, like Sebi said, CUNY Law, these past 3 years, and just it's just been so crazy and such an intense journey. And so that's where I'm at right now, and that's a little bit about me and like my life summarized.
As I reflect on like what you've gone through, I think about like energy, and I think about like focus, because law school is no joke. So how was that aspect for you, going through law school? Like, especially, I assume your parents are immigrants, right? Is that wrong to say, or were they born and raised in the United States?
Yeah. So my mom actually, she is an immigrant. Like she came when she was 3 years old. So her mom, my grandmother, and her grandmother, my great grandmother, are the ones who made that intense like big move to the U.S. From Peru. My dad was actually born and raised in Chicago, but his mom is Puerto Rican, his dad is Mexican. So I'm like a blend of all those things.
Yeah.
And so I think in a really fortunate and like blessed position where my family has been here, for almost 3 generations now. My grandparents moved here, like in the middle of, or actually quite early in their lives, and then my mom was, raised here. My dad was raised here. So that's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot. And we're all like in Texas right now, which is a really nice blessing, and we're all really together
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
life right now. Yeah.
So how was it grinding through law school? Can you tell us like the experience of
What it looks
like
like.
I went to undergrad for theology. I did a master's, but they are pale in comparison to people who go to med school, people who go to law school.
Mhm.
So I can imagine, how was the experience of going to law school? Difficult? What can you tell us about that?
Mhm.
Yeah, law school. Just there are so many lessons I've learned, and like I'm still like processing and like trying to like learn, from the past 3 years. So first of all, I want to share a little bit like about my school. So like I said, whenever I was in high school, I knew I wanted to like do something like involving maybe like human rights or women's rights, and I
Mhm.
had like a very like small understanding of what that was. I knew I wanted to just use my law degree to help others who couldn't be a voice for themselves. So I, you know, very specifically chose CUNY Law. Well, I think very specifically God led me there, but
Mhm.
CUNY is a public interest law school. So that what that means is that most people who
Oh,
are going there are graduating and going into practice law that promotes equality, like racial equality, economic equality, and different forms of equality. So that's
Mhm.
usually like
Mhm.
working at nonprofits or working, just in like public defense and things like that. So fortunately, my school is very different than other law schools that are like,
mm,
cutthroat, like ranking, all those
Mhm.
things. I always say like I went to a very kind of more hippie law school. And, I think that was just exactly where I needed to be. Um, they really prioritize self-care. They really prioritize like understanding like the role that lawyers play in bigger systems of
Mm.
inequality
Mm.
and bigger systems that we work within, like the legal system.
Yeah.
Can create so much harm in people's lives, but it can also really transform someone's life. It can also like change someone's moment from one second to another, like
yeah.
whenever they get like a visa
Mhm.
granted, or whenever
Mhm.
they have a status that allows them to get like food assistance or things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, I was really lucky to go to law school. That kept me kind of connected to the reason I went to law school, which was to help
Yeah.
people.
Mm.
And I was surrounded by
That's
people
good.
who were really hungry for like change and really,
That's good. That's good.
mobilizers in communities,
Mhm.
and like community leaders and like protesters, and people who didn't just see it as lawyers stepping in and saving the day,
Mm,
which I think at the end of the day isn't really going to be
Yeah.
like how we create change in our
Yeah.
communities. It's like everyone playing their part and doing
yeah.
what they can do. So
That's beautiful.
self-care, was hard. Law school created lots of comparison, lots of doubt, and lots of,
Mm,
am I supposed to be here? But
Mhm.
mm.
again, like having that other environment of people, who actually like believe in like what we're trying to do, and
Yeah.
who want to just help people at the end of the day, that really helped in the past 3 years, and kind of staying okay, and like figuring out who I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
As you're talking about this experience, what comes up to me is the idea of why you went into law school was something that reminded you as you went through law school. So serving people, helping people, taking self-care was something that was at the forefront of your experience in law school. And I really appreciate that, because there in our culture there is this stigma against lawyers, right? The
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
ambulance chasers, the people who want to extort money for your
Mhm.
behalf,
Right.
right, and
Right.
so forth. But you really emphasize like the idea of a hippie school
Mhm.
is pretty humorous, and thank you for sharing that, because I think that it's good to laugh in when we can, because life can be serious and it can be intense. So
Mhm.
I definitely see how you're making
Mhm.
your experience about people, and I think that's probably going to connect with like your faith experience as well, right?
Yeah,
Because
Yeah.
totally.
sometimes we make our our careers or
Mhm.
our goals about us, right? About how much money I get, how much I benefit. But you also have to understand, we also should have, how do I benefit others? How can I
Right. Right. Right.
contribute to the ecosystem,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna add to that too. I thought that was a beautiful point there, Delilah, because like you're saying, Edgar, I think you forget, you get into your work and you go in a year, 2, 3 years in, and you forget why you're doing the things that you're doing. And you're trying to get it
Mm,
just for the money. You're just trying to do it for the fame, or
Yeah.
but it's nice that you were at a school and institution that didn't really help to foster that desire of like, oh, I'm gonna chase the
top spot in the class,
right, right,
or
right. It's more of like we're here because we want to help other people, and that's
Yeah.
at the core of day. So how do you think that you can continue to foster that as you continue and move into your your role as a lawyer?
like foster.
That focus rather than focusing later on. 'Cause I think a lot of people come in with good intentions, but
Sure.
then you get into the hard work and you're in the weeds and you're doing this and that, and it just becomes, you know what? I
Yeah.
don't, you start focusing about yourself more.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, how can you make, and any of us, how can we make our
Mhm.
work like sustainable? Like,
Mhm.
I think you guys totally get it. I'm sure as pastors, like, trying to serve in a really important way in the church, and like trying to also make sure that you are filling up so you can give.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like this summer, like some practices that have really helped me just kind of keep checking in with myself and keep making sure, like, at the end of the day, I'm not like so. And this was like the bar summer, so this was a very intense summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some practices that helped me make sure like that I wasn't too like intense and like angst up was just like journaling, just enjoying Sabbath and just enjoying like the time off, and finding ways to kind of disconnect. And then keeping up with friends, and like having intentional like time to check in with like
Yeah.
close friends who are also going through it, or friends who aren't going through it, and just hearing about like the other parts of life. And that's kind of what Sebi said, what I've been doing the past 2 weeks. I feel like just like re-entering life and just like enjoying just being and hanging out with friends and catching up.
That's good. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, because it is very interesting. I think when as you're dealing with people in whatever line of work you are, whether in the healthcare system now, as a lawyer, as a pastor, teacher, as just a stay-at-home parent or whatever, it can be really easy, I think, to become more focused inside rather than externally, because people outside are going to hurt you. You'll probably have cases of people and clients that will not turn out the way you want it to. So I'm just going to focus on myself and forget everything else. I think as pastors, we face that too. It's like the church isn't moving in the direction I want it to, or we're fussing and fighting over the mask and everything that's going on. I'm just going to focus on doing my thing as much, and as long as I'm good, then I'm good. Which I think is important. There's self-care component is important, but reminding yourself every time, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? Which is another conversation too. Goes to, I think we're a generation. The younger generation, your young adults now, that aren't afraid to go into a different line of work, if what we're doing currently isn't fulfilling us in that section, right? Whereas before, our parents were just like, hey, we got to work, whatever, the dice was rolled. I'm here. I'm doing this. I don't like the job. I'm not feeling fulfilled, but hey, if it pays the bills, I'm good. Whereas we're now, I think, a generation where it's like, I can look for something that can pay the bills and also be fulfilled. And so I'm not going to force myself to be in a place that isn't fulfilling me, or even able to serve in the way that I'm passionate for and about. And so,
Yeah, as I think about our series of trending up, especially with the trenders, is to capitalize on the fact that each one of us has our walk with the Lord, and it's a personal thing. So something that comes up as we're talking is sometimes we make our career our idol, where we're constantly slaving to appease our career, to think about the promotions, to think about the opportunities, or whatever the case is. And something that you mentioned was to be sustainable is to make sure that you enjoy Sabbath and you take rest. You realize that life is not just about our career. And I think that in our culture, we are tempted with making our career our idol, our focus, our sole reason for existing. And there's nothing wrong with like proper work ethic. As Dalilah, as you've heard our podcast over the years, our favorite sports figure is Kobe Bryant, and Kobe had this Mamba mentality where it was super focused on his basketball career. And one of the biggest downfalls that I see in reflection of his tragic death last year was the fact that he said he was going to focus on his career for 20 years, and he did that, right? He was one of the best athletes to play basketball. But then he said, after I'm done, I'm going to focus on my family, right? So when you compare the 20 years that he lived, living and breathing basketball, which is at the end of the day just a sport, right?
Right.
But then when he retired, unfortunately, he only lived about 4 years after his retirement. We see that the career of the choice of making your career like his idol really didn't produce the results, in the sense the the outcome of, you know, spending time with your family, being there with your family, with your friends, with your community. And I think that as Bible believers, we have this understanding of Sabbath, which is not just a day of, you know, not watching TV and you know, not doing this or that, but it's a day about reflecting, about saying, like, I'm not defined by my 8 to 5, my job, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, beautiful lesson we have from the Sabbath of just being able to stop and shalom and get some peace, and Shabbat, and just stop and cease from our work. But going into the faith area and arena, tell us a little bit about your experience with God. Maybe you had a come to Jesus moment. I don't know if that was through summer camp or when you went off to college and law school, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I grew up in the church, and I grew up in a family that has been Adventist for at least like a few generations. And a family that was so dedicated to growing my brother and I think in the way of God, you know, learning from learning like memory verses when we were little, to going to church, to being involved in like summer camp ministries and things like that. I'd say it was at summer camp that I, you know, finally decided, at a really, really young age, I was 13 years old, and I decided to get baptized. I decided, you know, that Jesus was the person I wanted to believe in. And I think that's such a rare thing. I have, you know, tons of friends who grew up in really similar environments as me. And that just wasn't the choice that they came to. That's not where they're at right now. So I definitely have seen, you know, God's goodness throughout my life, and how he has also like sustained my belief in him. Like, it definitely ebbs and flows, and it definitely has its very low moments. But I think
Yeah.
it's just been part of such an important part of my journey with God. So I think my come to Jesus moment was just, you know, it's been kind of, you know, consistently through my teenage years. Those were really like really important years, from, you know, when I was baptized at 13. I remember like going home from camp and just feeling so loved by God, and just like so happy in the community I was in. You know, I was around people, Caro even, you know, Sebi's sister. I was around, you know, friends who also believed in what I did. I remember like reading my Bible in my room and just being like in awe, and like in like just like wonder of like the love that God has for me, you know, as a teenager, as a 13-year-old. So I think that like that picture of like my faith when I was like younger, like really inspires me, and like really reminds me, like, if God could, you know, speak to someone who didn't have much perspective on life, like, you know, grew up in a really safe environment, grew up in a really loving home, you know, I think that he so can offer so much for me whenever I'm like going through challenges of life, and as I'm getting older and things are getting like, you know, messier, complicated, as I'm like learning more about the world, like, you know, he still can offer that same amount of like peace and like security and consistency. Um, and then I went to summer camp for many years, and that was just you know, like the growing of my faith. It was having like a really strong faith community. Um, that was like Sebi and Caro and Chantal and her brother Omar and my brother and you know, lots of other siblings, and then also lots of other really close friends who are like family. And we were all just you know, in these allegorical plays together, and we were you know, hanging out with kids every day and trying to teach them what we learned at camp, that, you know, that there's a God who loves us and who is there to comfort us when we need that, and who is there to just walk with us through life and all the journeys that it brings. So I feel like those were really like special years, going, you know, through high school and having that kind of, you know, sanctuary at camp every summer to return to. And then I went to college. I went to a Christian university. It wasn't necessarily an Adventist university. And that brought lots of challenges too, like, you know, leaving a very small, you know, Adventist bubble of Keene, Texas, and going to a, you know, Baylor University is a Baptist university, Sikkim Bears. And I can see, you know, exactly how that was exactly where I needed to be. And I still like believe that. But I definitely just had a very hard first semester, as many people do, you know, adjusting to like a new like culture, like a new, you know, Christian, a kind of new Christian culture, you know, not really knowing many Adventists throughout my like 4 years. But fortunately it was really close to Keene. So I was able to like, you know, go home whenever and like still plug into like, you know, my parents' church community and my brother's, he went to SWAU. So like his like, you know, friends and like his community. But that also, you know, grew my faith in other ways. You know, I feel like we always grew up saying this, and it really is kind of, I feel like it's really harsh to say now, but we're always like, oh, you know, in heaven, there's going to be people who weren't like Adventists. And it's like, well, of course there are. Like, you know, there's so many people, but beyond our Adventist world. So that just, you know, kind of like solidified that picture for me, which I think it's kind of, you know, it makes me sad to think like that's the perspective I had when I was younger, just thinking like this was something that's only accessible to us. And I think that's something that I'm still like growing in and like, you know, trying to unlearn that like the gospel is literally for every person. So yeah, so that was my kind of Baylor experience, and you know, met lots of loving professors and friends there, Christian, non-Christian, Muslim, all these just incredible people who I feel like have each grown me into the person that I am, and like have really informed my faith and like why I believe in what I do.
Oh, I love it. That's
You
good.
know, as now I'm raising my boys, my son is about to go to pre-K, and he's going to go to a Christian school. It's not an Adventist school, but a Christian school. And my wife and I are talking about like the future, like what happens if in the future we are near an Adventist school and we send them there. And one of the biggest like things that my wife and I want to emphasize is how to raise our kids, like knowing the Adventist like perspective, but also not just being sheltered to being totally shocked to going into the world where not everybody has the same values, has the same perspective. And I think that is something that you already went through. And as a parent, I'm thinking about like how my son and both of my sons are going to maneuver through life, because I think sometimes we are tempted to go to insulate our, you know, loved ones, and instead of giving them the tools to be able to understand why we do what we do, and then also being able to be friendly and understanding of others that don't that are Christian, right? Specifically, or even those that are not Christian, to deal with them, you know, to love them, to care about them, to not be ignorant or proud and you know, just identify with their denomination. And I think that is something that struck a chord with me as you mentioned that, because I'm gonna, you know, venture into that frame with raising my kids, and I want to make sure that they're well-rounded, not just super one-sided.
Aware of everything else. Yeah. Well, thank you for telling us about your journey. And so as we transition, you know, you kind of took us through all the way up to Baylor and CUNY Law.
Yes, CUNY Law.
CUNY. I thought it was CUNY. Oh yeah.
I say it both ways, I think.
Okay. So tell us a little bit. You know, we've kind of seen your faith and how you've grown, where you were from. So tell us a little bit of where you're going and how you see your faith interacting with what you'll be doing. Obviously, you don't know exactly what, but yeah. You know.
Yeah. So like I said, I really can see now more and more clearly, and I think also like grow in understanding just how God led me to go to school in New York, how he led me to go to school at CUNY, and how he led me to eventually want to, you know, I'm trying to you know, find a job in immigration law, and you know, how he led me to eventually want to practice in immigration law. My senior year of Baylor, I took it was like a social innovation course, and it was centered around like learning about child migration from the Northern Triangle. And it was a really interesting course because they allowed us to kind of like it felt like a very like free kind of like think tank kind of vibe. Like they were allowing us to like learn from experts and then like think of a way that we could help. So like for us, we were like, well, we want to make sure these kids are like welcomed into the US when they arrive. We want to like make a know your rights kind of book that shows them like the process and like the actors and everyone that they'll meet like when they're entering the US. So that was, like I took that course like my entire senior year at Baylor. I had a wonderful, wonderful professor, like a awesome Christian professor who like was passionate about immigration and passionate about, serving the immigrant community. And I think that was just such an interesting seed and like a special seed that God planted in my heart,
Yeah.
because come like my time in CUNY law, after the first year of law school, you do an internship, and I was applying for tons of internships. Like I had some interest in like women's rights, and I was just kind of like trying to apply to things like across the board.
Yeah.
But the only internship that I got an offer from out of like the many I applied to was an immigration organization.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, like, this is one of the few I applied to.
Yeah.
But, I spent just a summer learning about immigration law in actually detention center. So really like hard, sad place to work. But like ever since then, I've seen like how God has just opened all these different doors for me. And like, very clearly for that summer, for example, like opening that one door for me.
Yeah.
And just kind of, bringing me on this path of like, okay, I want to serve, a community of people who maybe don't have always haven't always had access to the law, haven't always had access to like the top attorneys. I think about like my family's immigration story and how fortunate they were to come, and like very easily get work visas and or to be born here, like the privilege of just being born in the US and having citizenship. And it's so easy obviously to see like my family members and the clients, and the Latinx clients that I work with, and even the many other clients that I've had the chance to work with. So I think that kind of goes back to like the calling of like service that God has put in me. And especially like these past few years, I think you guys know about like Happy Givers, and I found them a few years ago, and they have that really great quote, like love thy neighbor, thy immigrant neighbor, thy Latinx neighbor, thy LGBTQ neighbor, thy Black neighbor, incarcerated, detained neighbor. And so I think my time at CUNY, like meeting people who are also like working so hard to love everyone who has like just had really unfortunate circumstances like in society or in the law, like that has just affirmed my faith so much, and knowing that like there are so many helpers in the world, that there are so many people who are trying to do the same thing as I am. There are so many people who might not like believe in Jesus or believe in God in the way I do, but share the same values of like service and like loving people, and like serving them in a way that meets their need.
Yeah.
And like putting that kind of at the center of like our work. So that's kind of, I don't know, I forgot the question, but that's kind of what
that's good.
what I've been thinking about like the past 3 years of just like how my time in law school and like my time in New York, like meeting just really incredible friends and really thoughtful, loving people, kind of tie in with like the calling of like love and service to our neighbors, and ultimately, that glorifies God, and ultimately, I think that changes us into like His people.
Yeah.
And you're fine, and you're fighting in the way that the prophets did, right? And speaking up for those that can't speak for themselves, and advocating for their rights and for their humanity. So we're proud of you and excited for how God's going to use you. So if you could say one thing to our listeners and to whoever is watching, in anything, right? If you could give a word of advice in terms of how our journey is about trending up, what would you say?
I think I'd say, like, I think we've like talking about like leaving like an Adventist bubble or even a Christian bubble, like of talking to people who are different than you. It's always scary, and I think we all will come to that point like at different points in our life and faith journeys. But I mean, don't be afraid to. I think God has taught me so many lessons in like the really hard like in between moments of life. Don't be afraid to reach out and to just see a person for who they are, like in front of you, like free of judgments, free of like, oh, I've heard this thing about this people or that about these people, or like, I think just carrying like that kind of kindness and like love and just like openness with people is something that's so important and has taught me a lot with like my relationship with others and how like God calls me to treat others and love them. So yeah, just don't be afraid of talking and opening up to people.
I love it. Well, thank you, Dweeb. Thank you, Dalilah. Dweeb is a nickname. It's not derogatory.
He thinks I'm a big dweeb.
No,
Yeah.
it's an endearing term between. Chantal was their counselor in summer camp, right? Long story short, I think that's where it started,
That's where
right?
it started. We were all dweebs, Garo, Chantal, and I. So that's just our nickname.
And I adopted myself as a dweeb bro.
Yeah.
Dweeb bro.
So that's what I
So,
call Sebby like 99% of the time.
dweeb bro. Yeah. So I'm dweeb bro and they're dweebs. But thank you so much, Delilah, for sharing.
Thank you.
Praying
Guys. Thank
for
you.
your results and for your next journey
Thank
and what
you.
you'll be doing. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you in the Supreme Court very soon. And for those that are just listening, we thank you for listening, for tuning in. And we hope that you're inspired by Delilah's story as she fights for others, not with others, as we predominantly think of lawyers, but for others who many times can't fight for themselves. And it's encouragement for us to do whatever we can to do the same, to help and to see and humanize others that are around us. All right. Have a great day, and we'll see y'all later. Peace.